as a telecom player, the kind of infrastructure, the kind of capital intensive sector that we are in, this infrastructure could be very well reused, adopted, leveraged upon by industries as you want to go global, as you want to expand your reach across India, as you make your assets more intelligent. So it's just a marriage of challenges to what exists, what technology can offer to you as a business. Now, again, as a company, I think I heard someone that, yeah, Vodafone, I know it is a mobile company, I didn't know you do it. Pretty much the context you walk in every time we are in a conference like this. Idea is just to tell you that as an integrated player, we have evolved ourselves with the market and pretty much can seamlessly connect across any market across the world. So it doesn't matter to us whether we have a network there, but we have a great partner network strength to make it a reality for you across the world. So last but not least, an imprint on is there something else that technology can do? Maybe payroll management for the labor force that you have, on-road labor, off-road labor. There is a lot of, we were actually solving this problem of inherent risk of cash collection, especially for the bill collection vans, maybe related, not exactly directly in industry here, is there is obviously a delay from the van that delivers the milk, which collects the cash as well, to the time the company receives the cash. So it's typically a T+1 or a T+2 kind of a delay. So can we make it real time? Can we use the power of technology to do it? The answer is yes. We've got mobile wallets. We have our own product, which is M-Pesa. Now what it does is two things. One, it reduces the lead time. It puts your working capital more better. Second, it actually reduces the inherent risk associated with cash in transit. That's a security risk. You completely eliminate any possibility of any risk, and you use the power of mobile technology. It doesn't take, it just helps you. Distributor opens an account, company opens an account, money gets transacted at the bank. Now, it's all possible here. So, the clarion call is that can we merge some of the possibilities from technology side to some of the challenges that you all have in the room to come up with something which is frugal, which is affordable, which is heartbreaking. So, for us, the world is exciting, the opportunity is exciting, and a context like this is extremely exciting for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, sir. We have also the conference convener. Let's give him a big round of applause as Mr. Govindraj, head in the Kashmir when he receives this momentum.
Opportunities and challenges for SMBs in the manufacturing industry.
Thank you very much, Solomon. And thank you very much for having me here in the 7th wonderful edition of the event that you're holding in Coimbatore. Mr. E.K. Ponduswamy, President of Kalisa, Mr. G.N. Balasubramaniam, Chairman of FinTech 2015, Aravind, Chief Guest, Mr. Manikam, Conference Chairman, and Mr. Philippe Jean-Pierre Camillana, Consul General of France in southern India, based in Pondicherry. We are actually quite lucky to have Mr. Philippe Jean-Pierre Camillana here. He's the only Consul General of all to be part of this event, and it actually shows the importance that France as a country dedicates to India and the interest that the French industry has in being part of the India growth story. I'm very honored to be here as your guest of honor. I am an Australian, but I'm half Indian, and incongruously I am the chairman of the French Chamber of Commerce in South India. And if that shows anything, it demonstrates that we live in a very interconnected world. And the challenge and the opportunity then for SMEs in the future will be how do we tap into this interconnected world and leverage all the opportunities that it throws at us, because it changes very rapidly. When I did get this invitation from Karthik, I have to say I scratched my head and I thought, I wonder why they called me to be the guest of honor. I wonder if the A-list and the B-list said no, and there were not a lot of people available, and therefore I got the invitation to come here. It might have had something to do with the fact that I'm the chairman of the French Chamber of Commerce, but thank you for having me here. I spent some time last night on this presentation, and I will try and make it as interesting for you as possible. I want to explain this cover here just before I start my presentation, and to me it takes you through the circle of what India has been through and is going through. For those of you, and I think a lot of you will remember, 30 years ago, most Indians went to work in a bicycle. It was made by Hero, made by Atlas. And as you went up the food chain, you bought a Bajaj or an Enfield or a ESD. And then as you went further up the food chain, you had an Ambassador or a Standard Herald if you were in South India, or a Premier Padmini in the West. But India has been through this immense cycle since 1991, and the picture at the bottom left there is the Bombay-Pune Expressway, recently taken, and it shows you that we've gotten into a very modern state of affairs, and Modi's Make in India campaign intends to take us into directions similar to what China has been through, and one only needs to get off the plane in Shanghai to actually have your mind blown about the significant leap that they have made in 10 years. I want to give you two pieces of gyan, so to speak, just before I go into the main part of the presentation. The first bit is, as an SME, we always wonder how do I make money, but there's only 7 ways to make money, no matter where you are in any country in the world, and no matter which business, whether you're in the aviation business or automotive business or in retail or in oil, manufacturing, retail services, F&B, or even electronics. In the end, there's 7 ways to make money. You can increase your prices, which we used to be able to do in the 80s and the 90s, but that's gone away. You can increase your margins by reducing your costs, and a lot of us did that in the 90s through lean, through efficient optimization of our production lines. When that is over, you can then attack your operating costs. First, the controllable operating costs. Don't allow people to fly business class. Make sure that everybody is going in non-air-conditioned cars. And once that's over, then you get into the controllable operating costs. How can I shut down 5 factories and make them into 1? How do I get maximum efficiencies? And finally, you can learn from Reliance and manage your tax rate and only pay the minimum alternative tax. However, a lot of people forget that in fact, those are only the top 4. There's another 3 after that, and that's managing your cash. And SMEs find this extremely difficult to do because most SMEs are not looking at it. Most SMEs are buffeted by demand, banks, delivery, lead times, and we're not looking at cash. And cash is really managing your debtor days, managing your inventory days, and managing your creditor days. I have seen many companies, I manage 3 SMEs, and I'm always amazed during the review meetings to find that debtor days are more than creditor days, which means the customers are taking longer to pay us than we are paying the supplier. And because we want to impress the customer and promise a big lead time, we have 6 months of inventory. So now you've got the bank taking money from you because of debtor days, you've got the bank taking money from you because of your inventory, and then you've got the customer who's paying you late, penalizing you for LDs because you've done something wrong in your supply chain. And that's crucially, usually the biggest challenge that an SME will face. So, I'm not here to tell you about the challenges that you know, because you are the experts in the challenges that you have and the opportunities that you have. But typically, your big challenge as an SME is cash. How do you get cash from your customer? How do you get the bank to give you credit? Half your time is going to be spent doing that, you know that. Your second challenge is low cost of competition from offshore countries, typically China. How are they able to sell in India at a price which is below your production cost? Atypical for an SME. The ability to attract and retain appropriate talent, let's face it, the multinationals have this problem because the A-list Indian students are already in the US, they're already in Germany, they're already in Korea, Japan, Hong Kong. So when you're an SME, you're already starting to struggle with people who are coming from a local university, having done an MBA at 20,000 rupees, but expecting a 20 lakh a year job. How do you keep them? How do you train them? Corruption, an endemic problem in India. My wife runs a retail store in Pune. She needs 37 licenses. Every day of the month for the 37, somebody turns up because you don't have a certificate up, you need a bribe to pay for something, there's an excise guy, a tax guy. There's even a guy who comes and tells you that you shouldn't be playing a particular kind of music in your store without having the license for intellectual property royalty payments. Poor or non-existing infrastructure. Yes, we have a few expressways. There's one running from Delhi to Agra, there's one running from Bombay to Pune. But really our infrastructure is non-existent. You need to really only go to Kuala Lumpur or Bangkok or Shanghai to see what infrastructure investment really is all about. And the reality is the government struggles with it, and therefore the SMEs are unable to get the right costs because infrastructure is poor. Then we have constantly evolving technologies. We had 2 gentlemen just now that talked about technologies, and as an SME you think you've just got on top of the wave and it's changed all over again. Your competitors got an advantage that you hadn't thought about because you don't have access especially in the more non-metro areas, access to fast evolving technology. And finally, this is something I find unique in India. This is the new India, which is, if the job's hard, prepare for high labor turnover, because there's a lot of easy jobs available and people are going to go and do it. And in an SME, the job's typically quite hard. So, I'm not here to tell you about these problems because you know these problems. I'll just summarize them for you. The opportunities, there are many. We've just heard two speeches in terms of how you can leverage these opportunities. I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Bhatia, the owner of Indigo Airlines, and he told me he runs his company like an SME. And that's the cartoon on the left side there, which is the philosophy of Indigo. Is life good? Yes, great, get on with it. It's not change something. And as an SME, we have the benefit to have that attitude because you have most things in your control. You're not dealing with bureaucracies, offshore headquarters. There's lots of things you can do to change your environment. The critical takeaway for me from Mr. Bhatia's meeting was he said, the reason I say SME when we manage a company as an SME is because we make sure that we make more money at the end of the month than we spend. And most companies get that wrong. So I thought long and hard and I said, I'm not going to sit and talk to a bunch of experts about the problems they already know are there. So I won't bore you on what you already know. Instead, I will come from the position of being from the French Chamber of Commerce, a Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to lift the view and take you up to the macroeconomic challenges and the macroeconomic opportunities that you might be able to leverage over the next 5 years to 2020. First up, what we already know. India is a large economy and has gone through an amazing wave. We are the third largest economy in the world today by purchasing power parity, 10th largest if you look at it in nominal terms. $2 trillion. Compare this to where we were in 1992. What's interesting though is now the rural part of India is a market. You cannot ignore this market. It makes 50% of the GDP today. Then we become a primarily services-driven economy. When I was doing my undergraduate, we were taught that India was primarily an agrarian economy, manufacturing was going to grow and services was very small. And that atypical in a mature economy, look at the United States for example, services is big. Today services are 60% of the Indian economy and industry is 26%. I'm a manufacturer, so I'm very, very happy with the Make in India campaign. But it does perplex me a little bit because in the end, if you look at the big economic growth driver in India today, it is services, and Make in India today still has not connected the services industry to the manufacturing economy. In fact, this services industry has grown despite and in spite of the government and still does not have the level of focus from the government. We have $50 billion in cash flows every year coming in as investment. Think of 1992, there was $20 billion in the bank, and we were so happy with the $20 billion back then. And finally, we're a maturing economy. We have 6,000 listed companies, and trading volumes have gone up 50 times in 15 years. If you look at the sheer numbers, 15 million motorcycles sold a year, 2.6 million cars. We produce 3.8 million cars, but 2.6 million are sold in India. The rest are exported. 800 tons of gold, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, 800 tons of gold and why it's important. And 20 million Indians holiday abroad every year. I had my office refurbished in Bombay 2 months ago, and in the middle of it they stopped work because the furniture contractor had gone to London for a holiday. This is the new India that can afford it, the new India that is actually able to spend money and contribute to itself. However, in all of this journey, India still has a lot of constraints because we are a classical supply-constrained economy, which means we grow really quick. As we grow, inflation catches up with us and pulls us back. And then you go through a cycle of degrowth before we can start growing again. And during the degrowth cycle, you have classically oversupply in the market, lots of factories that are lying empty, lots of people without jobs, lots of purchasing managers who are getting very adept at finding the bottom of the market in negotiating with small SMEs. So today we are at the bottom end, again, the big growth degrowth that started in 2009. Modi and his government is here, Make in India is here, and we're hoping for the grey dots to take us back to an 8 or 9% growth. However, as I want to demonstrate through my presentation, unless a few things are addressed by this government, we will go back through that same cycle again in 4 or 5 years. So growth slumped in 2010. What happened? We went from 11% in the last quarter of 2010 to 4% in the first quarter of 2014, and we've been sort of hanging around 4 to 6%. Most of this was self-created. We had high inflation, which is the supply-constrained economy. As you grow, the inflation grows. And then there's misguided spending by the government, which I will touch on in a bit. There was lack of reforms, and there was lack of decisions. We had every kind of scam: the telecom scam, we had the power scam, the coal scam. You picked an industry and there was a scam. It got to the point where we had such a clean defense minister, he decided the only way not to have scams is to not make decisions at all. And so the army and the navy and the air force was running without crucial equipment because nobody wanted to make a decision. And finally, the problem, which still persists today, is that corporate balance sheets were over-leveraged. The top 80 firms had $163 billion in debt. You only need to look at the firms that run the Delhi airport or Hyderabad airport to see how their capital versus their debt is and how much leverage there is in there to start to get worried. So this gentleman here has a bit of a problem. And he's got a problem on two hands because he's got a banking crisis that's potentially looming, but he's also got a problem with Mr. Jaitley, the finance manager of the minister, because he tends to talk the truth and say what is the reality in the market. The reality is, and it perplexes me again, there is a banking crisis looming because over 53% of stressed assets in Indian state-owned banks come from the infrastructure, iron and steel, and aviation sector. These are the core sectors of India. These banks are going to need over $5 trillion to recapitalize themselves, but nobody's talking about it in the Indian economy. You need to be aware of this as an SME because credit is not going to be that easy to get. Even if Make in India picks up, it's going to take 5 or 6 years for this level of mess to be sorted out. It doesn't help that, in fact, the big companies that have grown over the last 20 years have been companies that have had access to funds due to political leanings from state-owned banks. You only need to look at Kingfisher. I personally thought when Kingfisher went under, with the sort of exposure they had, one bank had 800 crores. One bank had 800 crores, that something would happen to a small bank like the State Bank of Patiala that was, or Punjab, that had 800 crores exposed to Kingfisher. We seem to have come out of that problem. These bad loans have been written off. However, there's many other companies that have that kind of leverage and inability to pay back and need to go through a corporate debt restructure. In all of this, however, the Indian CEO index is at a 4-year high. So we have a bad scene in the market. Things have not quite picked up, but we're all very happy and things are going to get better. Why is this dichotomy? You have a political confidence index and a business confidence index. It's dipped in the last quarter. We all know why it's dipped because everyone's looked at the budget and gone, hey, what happened? Wasn't there supposed to be a high-speed train? Wasn't there supposed to be a lot of investment in smart cities? Well, what changed was, as you know, the first time in 30 years we've had a majority government, which means that everybody thinks we're going to be able to get things through Parliament. That's yes, that's true, things will come through Parliament, but only when they get the Rajya Sabha, so it's another 2-3 years before some crucial decisions can be put through this government. However, I like this chart because if you look at it, it shows, except for the anomaly of Rajiv Gandhi's 5 years, where you had a significant majority, even during Nehru's era, even during Indira Gandhi's era, it was just a slight majority. So for those who are worried that this government is going to change the face of India, and history books will be rewritten, and there will be a different face to the country, I don't think you need to worry about that because India has always been a very sophisticated electorate. Even the most popular leaders didn't really have an overwhelming majority, and so we don't need to worry about the fact that they are only just barely over the majority line with this government. This government has also been very lucky because there's been a benign geopolitical environment. The oil prices have come down, we can talk about that, that's really geopolitics. As a result of oil prices coming down, the inflation rates come down, and all of that has actually helped this government, which explains the move